like dreams, daydreams, hopes, the sense of tragic, the sense of surprise, the sense of fantasia is the first cadenza. That interrupts that flow. Meanwhile, that flow is often over-pedaled because of that sweetness that it contains in the harmonization that blossom from the top down. First the middle up, and then the harmony gets full, and by the time you start anew, it drops. It's like the chord reveal themselves, a bit like water lilies. All of a sudden they open and you can smell the perfume. Of course, it's a harmonic progression, which at the end of the movement he really plays as a progression in chords. He could have continued. He chooses to go to the heart of it, as if all of a sudden the music stops and it's only inside yourself that you have the thoughts. Whenever in the opening, of perfect triads appear to be so innocent, in a way so reassuring, almost like a hope that it will be like that before it's the destiny holding and knocking. But again, when Beethoven writes the Appassionata, the opening chord of the harmony of the arpeggio of the theme, it's a simple and very consonant triad. This mysterious opening of the mists in the opening of the Appassionata should have been, perhaps with a diminished seventh, more dramatically suggestive. Of course, it would have been too obvious. So in a way, it's concealing the inner drama which will come in the Appassionata, explode. Like here it would explode. Beethoven likes to break things. Hopes, line, continuations, is very modern in that sense compared to their ordained Haydn, apparently ordained Haydn phrasing and group of phrasings, group bars. I would like to imagine that the melodic line in the opening is very hitting subtlety, because it starts on an upbeat, but nobody knows, because there is nothing before to know. In other words, the listener who doesn't know the score and listens attentively feels that this is a downbeat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. When we look at the score, it starts with an upbeat, and then 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, comma, 2, 1, dominant of 5 of 5. Towards that with the secondary dominant, but at this moment of the secondary dominant resolution is enough. More sweet, cheesy, thankfully not, by Beethoven. It interrupts it with this diminished seventh, which is clearly on the downbeat, and in 3/4, so it breaks immediately the cradling of the 2/4, even if we don't know it's an upbeat. I suggest to hear the upbeat by implementing the downbeat of the second beat louder than the first beat that appears to be the downbeat. So the upper stem melodic line. Now perhaps it shouldn't be so obvious and described, because then it loses a little bit of that mystique of the unsettling. Is it up, down, or down, up? But I still believe a little bit of impulse on that B gives it a little bit of settled Indian settlement. And then it's very important for the voicing to have the accompaniment arpeggio, or in fact apparently so because of the dotted rhythm and the 2/16 notes that follow, and obtain combination and arpeggio of two hands, which he was very much inspired by Bach's first prelude. With the two elements combined, creating an arpeggio. And here, before even the melody is cresting. He doesn't suggest that the voicing has to be mezzo forte, for instance, oboe, clarinet, while the rest would be harp. He writes piano and dolce, and since he writes for the instrument that is piano, I believe very much that it needs to be more blending in while still voiced, but subtly dark lit. Difficulty for the pianist is to make sure that the second of the two notes of the right hand's pattern, ta-da, 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 is softer, so that the next first, which is repeated, is the melodic line outlined by the upper stems. And not to avoid the repeated note. But I believe that practicing voicing should be more about first practicing different textures like staccato and holding the quarter note with the upper stem. We have to choose which one. You play it with pedal, these arpeggios blend between the two hands, while the melodic line subtly is brought out. He says vivace ma non troppo, sempre legato, piano dolce. Other than that, he didn't say much, right? Of course he says a lot of things in his words, but he hints so much more in his notes and in his stems, upper and down, which is why the pedal has to clear up every beginning of beat in order to have the next harmony be blossomed on the spot from the single melodic note suspended on the top. Of this opening, which is the belly, so to say, the middle of the movement, where the melodic line that drives is in the bass, and then continuing in the dialogue part in the top. And from this dominant of G sharp minor, which in fact is nothing but the third degree. He proceeds by a four-part chorale in a section by section reproduction of a pattern in the harmonic progression pattern. Predictable at the same time, almost like church music. You feel like some kind of very austere chorale, which elevates you just by the pattern of ascending fourth in the bass line. So you could have continued. Of course he didn't, but it's good to know what he could have, to know why he didn't, at least guess. It's a bit perhaps presumptuous to assume why, but mystery of creation should remain mystery. At least one thing we know is that he doesn't want a crescendo that reaches above forte, and only at the end of all this central section, which reaches the climax here. He inverts the rest with the 2/16 into a syncopated thumb holding that creates a dissonant suspension in the two extremities of the piano, again about the exponential expansion of his musical ideas that go beyond the limits of human hearing or human psyche. Yeah, I would like to replay this middle section. I wish to crescendo, but I don't. And then the modulations take care of it. G sharp, B, D sharp, F sharp, B, and dominant pedal, and on the tonic of the climax from all this progression, I am only forte. Of course, I was already forte 8 bars too early because of the build-up of intensity, energy, and desire towards this climax. So how to play with driven, progressive development of the melodic line, the harmonic progression, the exponential expansion on the two directions of the spacing, and not appear flat because you want to avoid the crescendo. In fact, you have to be intuitively driven. A bit like my teacher used to say that when you buy your ticket, you start traveling in your mind, not only when you're on the train, let's say, on the journey itself. I think in a way we start traveling from far away because we bought a ticket for a long ride. We already project where we could go, and we let ourselves discover the soundscapes. And once we stop moving in modulation-wise, we have more static sostenuto, but also ostinato. The B. Of course not. But that B becomes obsessive and intensive, like most Beethoven's music. When he wants to develop, he insists painfully almost, but also decisively, as a spear. That B becomes the sort of laser light that brings me towards the horizon line that he has to break. But because of the fact that it's very progressive, we want to let the music do it and not our expression of intensity and emotion override it. So we can start from... and you can tell yourself, not now. The music lifts by modulations, and you tell yourself, not now. Start your crescendo of emotion and extension. Of course, this, as I call it, the belly of the movement, is a long development, gives us a lot of capacity of crescendo, even if well dosaged, hopefully. But the opening, again, to go back to the opening, is abruptly interrupted. Only a few bars. Whenever the second time, it takes a whole page to reach, finally, so you would think, okay, that was the introduction of the sonata, an introduction and interruption with the cadenza, which I only hinted, but now we'll play. With the opening section for the longer lift towards the climax. Of course, he studied Bach, but probably mostly the son rather than the father. Well, not only, but C.P.E. wrote many fantasias like that, with interrupted, fragmented, sectionalized momentary bursts. And then this end. It's sort of a chaos of nature, as if it's the chaos of creation compared to the organization of nature in a groomed garden like. And then this wildness, the wildness of the human condition, tenderness and intensity. A bit like a recitativo that tells us about the character of the hero. Sorry again. The reason I'm saying sorry is because I'm so aware of the inharmonic spelling of the diminished seventh that I miss it. I guess sometimes ignorance is bliss. Because obviously when you start hearing it in E major, you don't hear but the C natural, and then when you read the B sharp, it's a secondary dominant, well, minor ninth with omitted root, which is a diminished seventh anyway, on C sharp, towards C sharp. And so you realize that this diminished seventh chord, which only came as a spark after the interruption of the dream, 3 bars later is developed into a whole scale, the whole, space of the keyboard. Finally I played it clean. So he takes his time to really sort of vocalize on the keyboard. Oh, sorry for that singing. intensity of emotion, of intimacy after this display of roar. All of a sudden, he's trying to be almost like harp in the high register, very delicate, inconsequently delicate after these bursts. So we're thrown from one emotion to another after we had an interrupted daydream, and all of a sudden we hear this cascade, which is so reassuring. Perhaps it will bring us to a combination of the opening. Not at all. It has a telescoping, rather colliding on the trajectory trombone, as if the trombone part of the symphony was having miscounted bars, and in the middle of the then tender harp descent, you have this sforzando and this low B that is unconnected to the right hand's dropping scale. And I think the pianist should think about playing the two characters in opposition. Not that they're opposed, they basically don't even connect. They're just superimposed in a very modern way, collage-like. And most pianists who try to carve the edges and make it don't service it, because Beethoven wanted this kind of ironic sort of part and this other sort of part. Yeah, so I often think that Beethoven's musical thought that are exposed in these late sonatas are not linear in development, with development of the thought process and variation development. It's more about spurs of the moment that just comes out from his psyche. And it's like somebody thinking, different thoughts come and they collide, and sometimes they're not even connected. It's like thinking loud voice. That's what it would be. And then when the linear return development of the tender first theme for a whole page, we feel almost like, oh, we found civilization, everything is groomed. Naturally, he doesn't finish happy. And they lived long after and had many children, like a fairy tale story that will finish well. There was always an ogre in the fairy tales. And when the second time Chopin used to do this kind of effect, because of Beethoven, obviously. Beethoven started that early romantic movement of the interruption of the melodic continuation, this fragmented breaking. But unfortunately, Beethoven here cannot surprise us the second time, because we've been already cry wolf told once that, and we won't believe the second time. After the first time we were caught, okay, but the second time after the climax, we go, oh yeah, again. There is no more rupture of disbelief at that point. We are starting to sort of get the scheme. Oh, okay, he's gonna go through another of these roars and another of these tender drops. And he does, in many aspects. And then the rhythmic ritenuto going from 30 seconds to triplets to eighth notes. And then probably a last time, the opening sequence with the upbeat departure. 2, 1. And as I mentioned in the beginning, he has this moment where he reduces it to a chorale in chords. 2 by intermezzo by Brahms, middle section, he has this kind of chordal moment of well-being. Rhythmicless, just harmonies in here. You can see where Brahms got inspired by Beethoven. Well, they all got inspired by each other, as long as the latest did from the earlier, which is obvious to us today. However, I was very often intrigued if perhaps this chordal sequence towards the conclusion of the movement, instead of the broken arpeggios with the voicing of the melodic line, but just the chords, wasn't perhaps just a short notation for the same going on, just the harmonies to be all played with equal harmonization, rhythmic patterns. That's a speculation which probably has no ground. But what struck me a lot is that before I even read the score of this sonata, and I, of course, since it's a very famous sonata, I have heard it like many of us hear pieces before they read them, a bit like we learn our first language by ear, the mother tongue, because we don't read it, we hear it spoken. Some of the famous pieces we hear before we read when we are in classical music. Very much involved, so, and all of a sudden the day you read the music that you have to play that you already had heard, you realize sometimes that the notation doesn't equate or something is awkward. And in my case, this chordal section ends with, in my early years when I was studying formal contrapoint and harmony and all these voice-led exercises with my teacher, there's no way we would attack a seventh by passing tone in the same direction, let less resolve it going up when the seventh has to resolve going down because of the tension release. But of course Beethoven is not writing an exercise in contrapoint, and he's a genius and he has the right to do what he wants. That is a granted fact, but it still bugged me. So looked at the manuscript available to read on and realized that there are different levels of ink that he used. First he finished or concluded this chordal section simply with the chords. Then he decided, you can see clearly on the handwriting, with a different texture of ink, he added the suspension to make it long towards the resolution, instead of just... But doing so, the dominant of the dominant, A, creates a very stretched disposition that most pianists anyway can't reach, and probably neither could he. And so this A natural comes now in the left hand. So he attacks that seventh by melodic linear motion, be it, but he continues up instead of resolving it. A to G, he goes A to B. A to B or not to B. Sorry for that easy pun. But it's intriguing because you can see that for the disposition, after he added this effect of the suspension, he was obliged to find a passing tone that softens the attack of the seventh. Of course, by itself it's an awkwardness if you had to do it as an exercise, but in his writing it becomes some sort of majestic blur, because the beauty of it is not in the correctness of it in terms of voice leading, but more in the inspiration that this low seventh creates compared to a more clean disposition compared to this which he wrote, that gives more gravitas. happens so quickly because now, of course, I sort of put a magnifying glass on this little progression, and it's progression in his writing. But now if I close all that and I play it as it goes, ritenuto less, just a little diminuendo, it would be... Sorry. So anti-intuitive because of the tension of the release that is upside down. But anyway, one has to accept and therefore make it believe. Yeah, that's better. That's what he wanted. Major, minor, that's more obvious. And since he didn't really put a double bar into the prestissimo, consider sometimes, most of the time, or perhaps some of us, that that prestissimo section is part of the first movement, which would be then the prelude to with a descent in the bass of the scale which we have in the opening in the bass, but hinted in this fragmented accompaniment. E, D, C, B, A, G, B, well, obviously F, but E. Well, obviously it's not meant to be played together, the two hands, but it has that unity of the descent of the scale, which is the lament of most of the Zacchaeus, the death of Dido, by Purcell, or the Crucifixus of the B minor Mass, which is in fact cantata number 12 in Bach. Some are chromatic, some are just diatonic, like here. It comes in minor. So because of the fact that there is obvious unity of thematic material between the opening movement and what appears to be a prestissimo second movement or second half of this first movement, be it as it is, we can consider it as two halves or two connected entities or one single entity divided in two. This quasi-fantasia, which is more than quasi, real fantasia, that he introduces in this sonata is striking by the fact that it appears to be notated so detailed, and appears to sound so improvised, which is what I meant to say earlier. When you hear it before you've read it, it sounds different. And when you decide to look at these two cadenza sections and you see the quintolets of 64ths, and then the triplets, 30 seconds, and then triplets of 64ths, and then 16th notes, it's sort of like subdivided and correctly aligned, almost maniacally displayed in the notation, and then in the performance it's supposed to, I assume in his own desire, supposed to sound improvised. This brusque change of pace and this spur of the moment, apparently so, but very organized storms are very striking. And You could argue that if he had just written barless cadenza with just a bunch of small notes that virtuosity the pianist has to display between arpeggios, broken thirds, all kinds of toolbox things for effects or virtuosity, diminished seventh arpeggios. But no, everything is so precise, as if he's organizing the chaos that has to sound chaotic. And then he covers up this apparent calm and well-being, but you sense that under the surface it's boiling till it reaches plenitude of the climax in the center of the first movement or half of movement. Again he has to break it, right? One can describe it, one can study it, one can just not speak and finally play it, or one can lecture recital it, one can teach it, one can chew it, one can memorize it, one can copy it by hand, one can memorize it in linear motion, one can count the bars, one can imagine that one wrote it so much it becomes part of your own pianistic life, as if you are the composer of it, at least for the cadenza sections that are supposed to mimic composition, rather improvisation I meant. And then one doesn't know. It reveals itself always differently every time you look at it with the age. Probably that's what's more interesting, as the philosophers say, the journey is the trip itself of life, and not the aim being to arrive wherever you have to reach your destination. And so sharing it loud voice is one thing, sharing it just with the notes is another, but every time you reopen this Pandora's box of possibilities, of meanings, of hints, and you try to connect the elements in a way that you think they're organized in this almost cosmos-like organization of planets, and all this is in constant motion and emotion. Well, thank you.